His mighty Lord of Khorne had fallen into a dark mood. The Red Raider stood aside in his lord's trophy room, listening as the Blood Warriors recounted their battle with the Sigmarites. The room was only a room by courtesy, one portion of the enormous war tent that sprawled across the center of the Bloodbound encampment, divided from the rest by curtains of stitched hide and heavy chains hung with the spoils of the campaign. Braziers burned low between the great iron supports, their light catching upon skulls, broken weapons, and captured standards, upon strips of flayed flesh grown black and stiff in the heat. Outside, the war camp was alive with the usual din of an army on campaign. The ring of iron, the bellowing of beasts, the laughter and quarrels of warriors. But in here, the heavy hides deadened those sounds to a distant murmur. The air smelled of smoke and old blood, and the heat was sweltering. It seemed not to trouble his lord. He had begun in a far more exuberant mood. That his Deathbringer and Slaughter Priest had been slain was no great bother to him. He had grunted at the news and waved the matter aside. More important was the pile of skulls that had been brought back in their place, and of skulls there were many. The Skull Reapers, having fulfilled their sacred rite for the day, sat at their lord's table feasting while the warriors spoke, and their lord listened with growing delight as they told of the annihilation of the Free Guilders, of men broken beneath axes and hacked apart as they tried to hold their lines, and how even the Blood Reavers had made a butchery of the Sigmarites until the Cravens finally turned and fled the field. It was only when the tale returned to the Deathbringer that his mood began to sour. Sorceress Flame had brought down his lieutenant, and the thought seemed to offend him in a way the death itself had not. He asked who had done it. The warriors told him. He asked what had become of the sorcerer's machinery, and they proudly told him it had been destroyed. He asked what had become of the sorcerer, and they told him that he had been defeated and driven from the field. Then he asked to see his skull. The Blood Warriors had no answer. The Red Raider watched the change come over his lord slowly. At first, he merely seemed annoyed, then disgusted, and then increasingly angry, as each attempted explanation only seemed to reveal another failure. It was then that the Red Raider noticed something he had never seen before. The Blood Warrior. His lord had been interrogating was afraid. Not the caution of one warrior standing before a stronger one, but fear. His voice quavered when he tried to answer. Another shifted almost imperceptibly away from him. These were men who had waded, laughing, into the Sigmarite guns only hours before, yet now none seemed willing to meet their master's eyes. The Red Raider wondered if this was simply how things were here, some ritual of submission practiced by those who lived beneath the mighty lord's gaze, for his lord himself did little more than sit upon his throne and glower. Even as the silence lengthened and the heat beneath the pavilion seemed to grow strangely oppressive, there was something almost petty about the cause of it. His army had won. They had brought him a mountain of skulls. Yet he sat brooding because one particular skull was not among them. At last, his attention wandered from the unfortunate warriors and settled upon the Red Raider.
And this one?
One of the Blood Warriors seemed relieved to have something else to speak of. He charged one of the sorcerer's lord, but their cannon struck him before he reached him. We used the distraction to advance and slaughter their line. We thought him dead, but afterward we found him half buried in the ash, still clutching his axe. The warrior looked toward him, breathing. The newly anointed slaughter priest stepped forward.
A gift, my lord. Khorne clearly is not done with this one.
A gift?
The priest stopped. The mighty lord looked at the Red Raider for a long moment, and then upward, toward the dark canopy overhead.
A mockery, perhaps.
My lord?
Khorne sends me the hand of an unblooded axe, and an army tainted by sorcery. And you call this a gift?
The slaughter priest opened his mouth.
You call this a gift, Slaughter Priest?
The roar filled the pavilion, and the Red Raider saw a Blood Warrior flinch. His lord rose and began to pace. He glared at the Red Raider, looked away, then looked back again, as though the sight of him were an irritation he could neither understand nor dismiss. The Red Raider could almost see the problem turning in his mind. The Deathbringer slain by sorcery. The sorcerer escaped. A warrior struck squarely by a cannon and somehow returned alive. His lord paced once more before stopping directly in front of him. For several moments, he simply stared. Then the anger left his face. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. When he spoke again, his voice was almost conversational.
I see.
The silence in the pavilion changed with him. The Red Raider saw some of the tension leave the gathered warriors, although the Blood Warrior who had flinched did not seem reassured.
Bring in my hounds.
The hides at the entrance were drawn aside, and the claws of Karanak entered, leading their flesh hounds on blackened chains. The beasts strained and snapped as they were brought into the trophy chamber, claws gouging the earth, brass collars gleaming around their thick necks. His lord watched them with something approaching satisfaction.
A collar, Hound Master.
The claw obeyed and brought him a heavy ring of brass, inscribed with runes wrought in contempt of sorcery. The mighty lord took it and stepped toward the Red Raider, fastening it around his neck with a hard metallic snap. Before the raider could decide what was expected of him, his lord caught the collar from behind and hoisted him bodily into the air. His throat closed, his vision swam. The mighty lord raised him until their eyes were level, and regarded him with an expression far calmer than the one he had worn moments before.
I see Khorne's purpose in you, dog.
He threw him into the pack. The Red Raider struck the earth hard and rolled among snapping jaws. The flesh hounds crowded around him as he struggled upright, growling, worrying at his armor and shoving their massive heads against him, as though deciding whether this new thing belonged among them or inside them. The claws watched without concern. If they considered the Red Raider substantially different from the beasts they tended, they made no show of it. His lord had already turned away.
I see what our lord wants from us.
There was almost relief in his voice now. He returned to his place before the great table, looking over the gathered warriors as though the unpleasantness of the previous few minutes had been settled. The Skull Reapers resumed their feasting. A few of the Blood Warriors exchanged glances. The Red Raider dragged himself clear of one flesh hound's jaws and got back to his feet, the brass collar heavy around his throat. Then his lord called for the alchemist. Two warriors emerged from behind one of the hide partitions, carrying the near-lifeless figure of the captured alchemist Warforger between them. They dragged him forward and held him before the mighty lord, who regarded the prisoner for only a moment before smiling.
I see you, Khorne,
he said, and grasped the Warforger by the scalp and decapitated him in one fluid motion. The head struck the earth, and the body collapsed after it, blood pumping freely into the dust. The mighty lord did not so much as look down.
See your purpose, Blood God.
Something answered. A wind struck the pavilion from nowhere, billowing its vast leathery walls outward and sending chains and trophies clattering against one another. The braziers flared so violently that warriors nearest them recoiled, and the blood pouring from the Warforger began to hiss against the ground. The mighty lord lifted his face into the unnatural wind, laughing now, while around the Red Raider the flesh hounds abruptly went mad. The pack threw itself against its chains with such force that the claws were dragged forward. They snarled and choked and howled, mouths frothing, claws carving trenches through the earth as every head turned toward the dead man. The blood beneath him was boiling. It spread outward in a bubbling crimson sheet, running beneath the great table and between the boots of the gathered warriors, more blood than any human body could possibly contain. The Skull Reapers rose from their feast. Blood Warriors began to shout. Beyond the hides of the pavilion, something answered the howling of the hounds, then something else, until the noise began to spread outward through the camp. The Red Raider looked down as the blood reached his boots. Something moved beneath its surface. A vast muzzle broke through the crimson pool, jaws opening as though the earth itself had grown teeth. A second head tore free beside it, then a third, and the flesh hounds erupted into such a frenzy that one of the claws lost his footing and was dragged screaming across the blood-slick earth. Great talons hooked into the ground. Muscle, brass, and blood-red hide followed as the thing hauled itself upward from a depth that did not exist, the blood cascading from its 3 heads as they snapped at the mortal air. The mighty lord stood before it, still laughing.
I call on you, Karanak.
The demon roared. The sound hit the Red Raider like a physical blow. The walls of the pavilion snapped against their bindings. Braziers overturned. Skulls and trophies crashed to the earth. Outside, the encampment answered, first in scattered cries, then in a gathering roar as the frenzy raced outward through the host. Warriors who could not possibly have seen what had happened within the tent began hammering weapons against shields. Beasts howled from their pens. Somewhere beyond the pavilion, a great chorus took up the name of Khorne. The mighty lord's laughter stopped. He stood before Karanak with his axe hanging loosely in one hand, the blood of the Warforger still running down its edge. His eyes rolled backward until only the whites remained. When his mouth opened again, the voice that emerged was not the voice that had berated the Blood Warriors, nor the voice that had calmly ordered the Red Raider collared. It was deeper, doubled by something beneath it, each word seeming to come from his throat and from somewhere immeasurably distant at the same time.
I see you, Quarry.
Karanak's 3 heads went still. The Fleshhounds stopped fighting their chains. Across the pavilion, warriors fell silent in the middle of their howls, and for one impossible moment, the gathering roar of the encampment beyond seemed to draw inward around the figure standing before the demon. His head turned slowly toward Karanak.
Ignatius Vaelor.
The demon's 3 jaws opened. Karanak howled, and whatever restraint remained within the war camp broke with it. The Fleshhounds hurled themselves against their chains. The Blood Warriors roared. The Skull Reapers overturned the table as they surged forward, axes raised, while outside thousands of voices rose together in a frenzy of blood and murder. The great pavilion shook around them, full of smoke and boiling blood and the screams of beasts, and the Red Raider felt the brass collar burning against his throat as something hot and terrible surged through him. He threw back his head and howled with the pack.